Several years ago, I was doing a concert in Brazil, Indiana, my hometown, with a guy by the name of Gordon Mote. I had just recorded a CD, my first CD in Nashville, and this was my first time back home after recording this CD. And the local paper did a big story on it and made it sound like I was going to be like this pretty big deal or something. And so we had this concert going. We didn't know how many people to expect, and about 500 people showed up for the concert that night. And I didn't know if they were coming to see this local guy who grew up in Brazil, if he'd gotten any better than when he was a kid, or if they were coming to see the Grammy-nominated Gordon Mote. I think it was probably B, right? So Gordon, he's on all these Gaither videos. He's a studio musician. He's played with people like Carrie Underwood and Rascal Flatts, Brad Paisley, some of these people, and he's on all, like I said, all the Gaither videos. And we had our product table set up. I have my product table over here with one CD on it, the only CD I'd ever made. It was just this little 4-foot table with a little tablecloth on it. I was pretty proud of it. But next to me was Gordon Mote, and he had 2 tables, and he had CDs, he had videos, he had hats, he had T-shirts, he had Frisbees, he had coffee mugs, he had autographed pictures, all of this sort of this great big thing. Here's all his stuff. Here's little old me. Anyway, we're standing there talking in between our product tables before the service. And this lady comes up to me, and she looks me dead in the eye, and she shakes my hand. She looks at me like she'd just seen Elvis in Walmart or something. And she gets all excited. She shakes my hand. She goes, "I just love you on all them Gaither videos." And I'm like, "I don't know who you think." And I get that out of my mouth, and Gordon grabs me by the arm. He says, "Just go with it," right? And so Gordon is blind. He'd been blind since birth. I have no idea who she thought I was, but Gordon, the blind guy who's in all of these Gaither videos, was standing right there. This is a guy who'd been nominated for Grammys. The lady didn't even talk to him. She didn't say a word to him. I don't know if she thought I was his interpreter or something, you need an interpreter for a blind person. But anyway, she just thought I was somebody, I guess, and she had her eyesight, and she still didn't have a clue who I was, or who she thought I was. I still don't know. I had my eyesight. I have no idea what she was thinking. The only guy that really knew what was going on was Gordon, the guy that couldn't see. And so it was just this funny moment that I'll probably never forget, where something is going on in the midst of where I'm at this particular time, and nobody really has a clue what's happening. But how many of you have ever looked for something, and you've looked at it for a long time? Like, let's just say you've looked for your glasses, only to discover they're on top of your head. Or you've been looking for your car keys, and they're in your pocket. Or you go to the refrigerator, and for some unknown reason, the ketchup is not in the door where it's supposed to be. It's on the shelf instead, and you can't see the ketchup because it's not where it's supposed. How many have ever done something like that, right? And so we have our eyesight, but we still sometimes don't have a clue really what is going on in any particular scenario. Even if we have functioning eyes, sometimes we miss what's right in front of us. And that's what's happening in this story that we're talking about today as we continue this series on the road again. We come to a story found in Luke 18 that Madden read for us just a moment ago. It's about Jesus on the road to Jericho. He encounters a blind man. This blind man seems to know more about what's going on than all of the people around him. And so I want to read again what Madden read for us. It's in Luke 18, beginning in verse 35. It says, "As Jesus approached Jericho, a blind beggar was sitting beside the road. When he heard the noise of a crowd going past, he asked what was happening. They told him that Jesus the Nazarene was going by. And so he began shouting, 'Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me.' 'Be quiet,' the people in front yelled at him. But he only shouted louder, 'Son of David, have mercy on me.' When Jesus heard him, he stopped and ordered that the man be brought to him. As the man came near, Jesus asked him, 'What do you want me to do for you?' 'Lord,' he said, 'I want to see.' And Jesus said, 'All right, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you.' Instantly, the man could see and followed Jesus, praising God, and all who saw it praised God too. So there's three main things I want you to see from this story. The first one is this: faith hears what others often overlook. Faith hears what a lot of us don't have a tendency to see with our own eyes. I want us to set the scene for a minute. Jesus and his entourage is on the way to Jericho. Now, we have to remember what has just happened right before this. Remember, Jesus, last week we talked about, had just healed a Roman soldier's son who was really sick. And then he meets the widow who had just lost her only son, and he places a hand on the casket, and the boy comes back to life. And so there's a lot of buzz about this. The crowds are pressing in. There's a lot of excitement. And as they're going toward Jericho, there's this blind guy sitting on the side of the road begging. And this is a guy that's used to being invisible. His entire life, he has just sat by the road, and he's been dependent on the mercy of whoever happens to pass by. And honestly, most people who pass by do what we do a lot of times when we see people standing by the side of the road holding a sign. We try not to look at them. We're certainly not going to give them any money. And that's between you and Jesus. I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but we have a tendency to ignore, right? And I think that's what this guy probably experienced most of his life. And that morning started out like every other morning that he had experienced. He'd find his spot. He'd listen for the footsteps. He would listen for coins and then repeat. Find a spot, listen for footsteps, listen for coins. Find a spot, listen for footsteps, hope for coins to drop. But this day something was different. There was another crowd coming by that was different than most of the crowd. There was an energy in this crowd that was like nothing that he'd experienced. And someone said, he said, what's happening? And someone replied, Jesus the Nazarene is passing by. And now suddenly, this day that started out like any other ordinary day suddenly becomes this divine appointment for Jesus and this blind guy. Verse 35 and 36, it says, as Jesus approached Jericho, a blind beggar was sitting beside the road. When he heard the noise of a crowd going, he asked what's happening. Now, this guy can't see, but he's listening. He's trying to pay attention to what's going on. He hears the buzz. He knows something is happening that's not like any other day. And so he's like, what's going on? What's different about this? And just the presence of Jesus changed the feeling of what was happening. And so he's listening, and he has this faith that you don't really need eyes to experience. He was seeing with his ears, really. He had this vision of Jesus, and he could hear what a lot of people often overlook. I think all of us men have been accused of having selective hearing. Can I get an amen to that? You ladies know what I'm talking about, right? Like we can be sitting in the recliner watching TV and you say, hey, there's a load of laundry that needs folded, and you don't hear a thing. But she just whispers ice cream from down the hall, and you come running down the hall like a bloodhound on a escaped convict. You know what I'm talking about? I mean, it's like you are just locked in. We have this selective listening. Somehow we have a tendency to hear what we want to hear. And that's what I think was happening with the crowd that day, spiritually speaking. The crowd could see Jesus, but they didn't really hear what he was about. They didn't really know what he came to do. And the blind man, who couldn't even see Jesus, he was tuned in to what Jesus could do for him. And we do that sometimes in our lives. We sit in church, we sing the songs, we hear the sermons, but we walk out as if we haven't heard anything. We're not really listening to what is being said. We may miss what God is doing right in front of us. Romans 10:17 says, faith comes by hearing, hearing by the word of God, or the good news about Christ, the NLT says. And our faith journey might actually start before we see what Jesus is trying to do in our lives. We sometimes have to take that leap of faith. If you think about it, you look all throughout Scripture. When did Noah build the ark? Was it after it started raining? No, it was before it ever started raining. Abraham left home before he could see the promised land. They just trusted God. They could see what God was calling them to do, even though it was way down the road, even though the outcome was not visible at that particular time. They trusted God. And this blind guy, his eyes didn't work, but he believed that Jesus could do something about his situation. His heart recognized Jesus. Even though his eyes didn't work, his heart was working just fine, and he cried out to Jesus because he knew this: faith cries out despite the crowd. And Jesus hears, right? Luke continues, so he began shouting, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." "Be quiet," the people in front yelled at him, but he only shouted louder, "Son of David, have mercy on me." This crowd calls him Jesus the Nazarene. You need to know that that is not necessarily a term of endearment for Jesus. He was from this little wide spot in the road called Nazareth. Nathanael even said, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" And so when they called Jesus the Nazarene, it was kind of like a regional slur. It was not a flattering term at all. So they call him the Nazarene, but the blind man calls him the Son of David. Again, they could physically see who he was, and they knew about him, where he was from, but the blind guy could not physically see, but he knew who he was. You see, that's the big difference. The crowd knew where Jesus was from. The blind man knew who he was. And so he cries out for mercy, "Son of David, have mercy on me." And he cried out not because he thought he had this impressive resume, not because he thought he deserved mercy, not because he thought he earned some type of miracle. He just cried out because he knew that Jesus was someone that could do something about the situation. And the people all around him, they're trying to shut him up, and they're disrupting the moment. Maybe they thought Jesus was too busy to deal with a guy like that. Or maybe he had just become this familiar voice in the crowd that everybody was just sick of hearing. To the crowd, he was an interruption, but to Jesus, he was somebody made in his image. And so the Bible says he stopped for this guy that nobody else probably paid any attention to. One of my favorite preachers was a guy by the name of Wayne Smith. He used to always say the church is a hospital for sinners, not a hotel for the saints. And unfortunately, what churches have become is institutions that act more like the crowd on that particular day, determining who is able and who is worthy of coming to Jesus and who isn't. Try to manage who has access to Jesus, deciding who qualifies for his time or who deserves to be in his presence. And what we do sometimes as a church, because of our legalism and religiosity, I don't even know if that's a word. It is now. Write that down. Remind me of that. I'm going to start using that. Because of that, we restrict who wants to come, or we don't even allow people to come to Jesus who are hurting, people who need him, people who need help, the help that Jesus can give them. And we try to determine who deserves that sometimes. How many of you have ever had a persistent child? Right? I think all of us at one time or another, maybe that's plural. Maybe you had persistent children, right? You tell them no about something, and then all of a sudden they just become the world's greatest negotiator. You know what I'm talking about? "Mom, can I have a cookie?" "No, it's almost dinner time." 5 minutes later, "Can I have a cookie now?" "No, it's still almost dinner time." 2 minutes after that, "Mommy, can I have half the cookie?" "No, you can't have half the cookie." "Mommy, just some crumbs." You know, they just keep going and going and going back and trying to get what they want. Why do they do that? They know that mommy, probably more likely daddy, that's where they probably should go, or papa, that's what they should do. And so, but anyway, they know that we have the ability to do something about their situation. We're able to grant what they're wanting, and so they're just persistent. They just keep at it until we give them what they want. The blind man didn't have to beg and coerce Jesus, but he was loud. He was persistent. He shouted above the crowd, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he refused to let the crowd quiet him down. He cried out even louder, and he had this desperate faith, and he wasn't embarrassed. He didn't care about what the people around him were thinking. And what we do sometimes is we allow the crowds around us, to quiet our faith. Or we allow Satan to get in our heads and say, "You know what, you've prayed long enough about that. Nothing's ever going to change. You're not important enough to be granted that prayer request. You're not important enough for God to even notice you." And what we do is we think that our shame, it disqualifies us for some reason. We have something in our past that we're ashamed of, and Satan reminds us of that. And so we let Satan remind us that we don't deserve to talk to Jesus like that. Or maybe we have this pride in our lives where we say, "I don't need Jesus. I can do life on my own. I don't need anybody's help." And sometimes if we're just honest, which I assume you would appreciate, the loudest crowd inside our heads is often our own disappointment, our own fear, our own shame. We let those voices speak to us instead of doing what we know we can do to improve our situation, and that's turn to Jesus. But what faith will do is it'll shut up all of those voices in our heads, and we cry out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." When the blind man cried out to Jesus on that particular day, when Jesus was on the road to Jericho, Jesus stopped. Look at Luke 18:40. When Jesus heard him, he stopped and ordered that the man be brought to him. I don't want to rush past this. This is important to note that Jesus stopped. He's on his way to Jerusalem. He's on his way to the cross. He's on his way to do the most important thing in the history of mankind. If anybody had reason to keep going and say, "No, I'm too busy to deal with this blind beggar," I think it was Jesus. But he didn't. He didn't ignore him. He stopped. He heard him crying and he responded. Everybody else saw this guy as an obstacle. Jesus saw him as a guy that was made in the image of God, and he wanted to do something about it. Listen to this. If you don't hear anything else today, I want you to hear this. You are never invisible to God. Your need, whatever it may be, is never an interruption to Jesus. Even if other people label you a failure, or other people label you because of a diagnosis you've been given, or a limitation that you may have, or maybe something that has happened in your past that you're not proud of, and they've labeled you, understand that Jesus sees you. And then us, as followers of Jesus, we need to take the time to see people and to honor their dignity. Jesus always sees those who are unseen. And we read this story, Jesus stopped, and then he ordered the crowd. This is great. The same ones who were trying to shut him up, Jesus orders that crowd to bring him forward because he's about to do something about the situation. I love that. One preacher said, the silencers suddenly became the servants. And that's the church at its best. Instead of criticizing people who might be going through difficult things, how about we come along beside them and help bring them to Jesus? And Jesus asked in verse 41, "What do you want me to do for you?" And the man replied, "Lord, I want to see." Now that sounds obvious, doesn't it? I mean, here's this blind guy, and Jesus wasn't asked, like, Jesus knew what the guy wanted, right? It wasn't like, "Oh, I didn't see that coming." No, that wasn't it at all. Jesus knew what the guy wanted. He knew he was blind. He knew he wanted to see. But I think what Jesus was doing is he was inviting this guy to move from this general cry for mercy from him to a point where he is specifically asking Jesus to do something for him. I can imagine that most of the people in the crowd that day had talked about him over and over and over again for years. Right? They probably are saying bad things to him. They're probably talking bad things about him. But Jesus stops and he talks to him. And he says, "What do you want me to do for you?" "Lord, I want to see." That's amazing. He didn't say, "Lord, can you give me a better spot alongside the road?" No. "Lord, can you encourage the people to give me more stuff, to be more generous? Or can you make me more comfortable in my darkness?" That's not what he did. He said, "Lord, I want to be transformed. I want to be able to see. I want you to heal me." He knew that Jesus could do something about his situation. And I want you to know that Jesus hears and he honors your honest prayers, your specific prayers. He's not intimidated by your brokenness. And understand me, like a specific prayer is not a way to get God to do something that you want him to do. You're not twisting his arm. It's just a way of saying, "God, I surrender my needs to you. Everything that I am, all of my wants, all of my needs, physical, spiritual, whatever they may be, I am surrendering them to you." And so I want to ask you this question, and you might need to wrestle with this question. If Jesus were in the room today, if he was here physically present, and he said to you personally, face to face, "What do you want me to do for you today?" What would you say? Would you give the religious answer, the safe answer, the one that you think everybody else, thinks you ought to do so you'll look and sound more spiritual? Or would you be honest? Would you say, "Lord, my heart is broken over something. Lord, I need a relationship restored. I need freedom from a destructive habit. I need direction for a decision. I need forgiveness for a secret sin." You name whatever it is you're struggling with, bring it to Jesus. That's what the blind guy in our story did, and we see that his request had this incredible result, and that's because an encounter with Jesus changes the road that you're on. Look at verse 42. "All right, receive your sight. Your faith has healed you." And instantly the man could see, and he followed Jesus. And he was praising God. And all who saw it praised God too. All of a sudden, light comes to these eyes that had been dark. And he sees faces, and he sees colors, and he sees trees, and he sees birds. He probably looks at the people who were not allowing him to come to Jesus and probably thought, "That's not at all what I thought that person was going to look like." And then he sees Jesus standing right in front of him. Can you imagine? The very one who healed him, seeing him there. That guy started out the day sitting beside the road blind, and he ended the day being able to see, walking down the road with Jesus. And he could have let the crowd silence him. And he could have assumed that Jesus was too busy. And he could have protected himself from disappointment. He could have accepted that nothing's ever going to change. But he heard that Jesus was near. And so he cried out. And Jesus stopped, and his eyes were open. And he started walking down the road with Jesus. There's a poem called Maud Muller, written by Civil War era poet John Greenleaf Whittier, that goes, "For of all sad words of tongue or pen, the saddest are these: it might have been." If Jesus said, "What do you want me to do for you?" What are you going to say? What blindness do you need Jesus to remove? What sin needs forgiven? What wound needs healing? What need in your life have you been afraid to name? And maybe the crowd is telling you, "No, you've waited too long," or "No, you don't deserve that." Don't listen to the crowd. Jesus is standing in front of you today, and he's saying, "Come to me, all you who are weary, and I will give you rest." We're going to offer a song of decision this morning, and maybe you're here today and you just need rest. You know, you've been dealing with stuff that's just absolutely flat out wearing you out. And you need to just lay it at his feet and cry out, Son of David, have mercy on me.